let's introduce ourselves.
Yes.
My name is Kara Blue. I work here at the library on the adult side. I'm a reference librarian. I've been here about 4.5 years, and I have fun with fermenting all the time.
And I'm Maureen Birchfield. I've been here at the library. I work in programming and outreach, and I have worked here for 23 years. And I also have fun with ferments.
Yes, they are fun. And that's one of the reasons to ferment, because it's fun.
That's
but
right.
There are other reasons to do this. So let's go through some of those to start off with. One is practicality. I'm a very practical person. I like practicality. If you have a lot of extra veggies in your refrigerator and they are about to go bad, fermenting them is a way to save them and bring them back to life, so to speak, before they totally spoil. It's generally a faster way to preserve as compared to something like canning. It's a cost-effective way to use up bulk food items. So if you are a bulk food shopper and you come home with a lot of produce, or let's say it's seasonal farmers market time and you can get a fantastic deal on Brussels sprouts, well, maybe you want to ferment those so you don't waste the money you spent on the Brussels sprouts. It's fun. It's challenging because you never sort of really, honestly, aren't 100% sure you know what you're doing.
So see, I mean, I consider both of us to be fairly well versed in this, but it's true. You don't always know what you're going to come out with.
And we should give our disclaimer too.
Yes.
That we are not experts in this. We do this in our home kitchens. We have not gone to school for this.
Right.
We don't have a degree in this. We do our research probably mostly by using materials that we have available in this library or in our consortium libraries. Let's see, what else? Taste. If you like fizzy things, sour things, tangy things, you will like fermented foods. You can try all different kinds of interesting combinations. So in addition to using up extra vegetables, you can mix certain things together that maybe you wouldn't normally mix if you were cooking them. And then the health benefits. There's a lot of information out there. You should read it on your own and come to your own conclusions about the health benefits of eating foods that have probiotics in them, which is what fermented foods are trying to accomplish.
Right.
Do you have anything to add?
Well, I suppose the idea of the health benefits. Again, we're not doctors, we're not nurses, we're not medical. So what we say is what we've read, and of course what we've experienced ourselves in using ferments. So it is fun and interesting. It gives you a good feeling when you have done something like this and then you consume it and your friends consume it and then they say, oh, it's wonderful. And that is satisfying. Satisfying.
All right.
So.
Any questions so far about why to ferment? Okay, mostly because it's fun. So we are going to sort of tag team, kind of going by what's up here on our table in front of you. I think we're going to begin with veggie fermenting. So I'm going to start down here kind of at this end of the table. The first thing I want to go through with you is some of the equipment that I use when I'm doing veggie fermenting. You don't have to buy a lot of expensive equipment. You can buy equipment if you want, but you also can do lots of fermenting projects with reusing jars that you bought at the grocery store. This is a honey jar. There would be no problem with using this because a standard mason jar lid and ring tightener thingy, I don't know the technical term for it, band or something like that,
yeah.
Fits on a standard like jar top of this kind. But this is some of the equipment I have had the pleasure of trying out. So I was gifted this gigantic crock.
And that is beautiful.
Yeah, and really, I kind of use it as a decorative piece in my house most of the time. But it is a water sealing crock. So you put your veggies in the container, in the vessel. You pack them way down. And then there's a brine over the top of them, a saltwater brine. And then you have to weigh that down so that the veggies stay underneath the brine liquid. And you do that with this vessel with the weights that come with the vessel. So that's what those are. And then there is a cavity at the top where you put water in that, and then you put the lid on top, and it creates a water seal. So you don't ever have to open the vessel to check the ferment when you use this. You just let it go for as long as you're going to let it go. You don't disturb it, and when you reopen it, hopefully your ferment is done. So that's what that is. There's different sizes of crocks. You don't have to get one that's this gigantic. The main time I use this is if I want to make a lot of sauerkraut. But to be honest, I'm almost always using something that's about this size, maybe this size. So these are just two different sizes of mason jars that you can get almost anywhere. This type of sealing flip top jar is really popular. A lot of people, I've read a lot that a lot of people really like this kind of a jar for fermenting because again, it creates a nice snap seal on the top. What else do I have here? I have different kinds of lids. So the last time Maureen and I did this class together was 2019, and she brought up the point that she likes using the plastic lids sometimes because the ferments get really acidic, and the longer you have this sort of sitting around, the more likely you are to have your jar and your lid kind of rust. So you may instead want to use a plastic lid, like so. This one is kind of interesting. This one is, it's kind of like a seal. This would be if you want to have a cover on your ferment, but you want to be able to burp it. So it has this little hole in the top, and you can just go over to your jar and just give it a little squeeze and burp it, and some air gets in there, and some air gets out. So it lets your ferment breathe a little bit. What else do I have up here? I have these kinds of weights, which really only work if you're using a wide mouth mason jar, because otherwise they are too big for a slim size, regular size mason jar top.
There are ones that are made for the regular top mason jars.
I don't have any of those.
Yeah.
But you can see I can't use it. It doesn't fit in there. I guess, this is what I use to, again, this is kind of fancy. You don't have to have anything quite this fancy. This is what I use to push the veggies down into the jar to squeeze out more of the brine that's naturally inside the veggies after I've put salt on them and massaged them. I can push the veggies down further into the jar in hopes that more of the brine comes to the surface. So it just gives me good leverage.
And the kraut pounders, and if you notice that, I have one like that also. There's a bigger end and a smaller end, depending on what kind of size jar you have. Then also, you can find these at antique stores all over the place. And they're called a million different things, rarely what they were. They're called a kraut pounder. And that's what they're for, pounding kraut. And I have an antique one. It's beautiful. The head is a hardwood, and it's got a painted handle, and it's really beautiful, and it works great, though it doesn't work on a small mouth jar. Mm-hmm. So I did buy one of those to have that. So look for them under mashed potato, but those aren't made for mashed potatoes. So.
No, they're not. But yeah, you can see the small end fits into a regular mouth kind of a jar. the larger end would fit into a wide mouth jar, which is what I have here.
Karen, can I ask you a question? The burping lid,
This one?
is there any particular thing that you would ferment that would be beneficial, that would be a good?
Question was, is there any kind of special ferment you would use this kind of a sort of a burping lid with? You wouldn't use it with you could use it with really with any veggie ferment, because when you're doing that fermenting process of veggies, you're not supposed to necessarily screw on a lid really tight. And if you do put a lid on and keep it kind of loose, you are supposed to periodically unscrew it and burp it. So this just makes it easier, because instead of having this part of the lid, you can just put this part on. This is, it doesn't work on the regular mouth jar, sorry. I should have put it on this one. But then you can screw the band over the top of it and then just come through and burp without disturbing the whole thing.
I will say you don't necessarily even have to burp them, because it has the hole, so once a little pressure, it's designed to come out. So, and there are a few different kinds of things that do that. If you start looking on the internet, you'll see different ones. I just bought some of those, and I really like them.
Yeah, I kind of forget that I have them. I often get sort of lazy. I don't know if this is considered lazy, but sometimes to seal a ferment, so this is one that I've got going that I have left undisturbed for maybe a week and a half or two, and I needed to weigh it down so that my carrot, this is a kind of a carrot kraut, I needed to weigh it down so that the veggies stayed underneath the liquid. So all I did was stick a Ziploc bag in there and put a little bit of water in, and that's enough to keep the veggies submerged in the brine. So that's a really easy way, I think, to weight stuff down, especially if it's a pretty small, kind of a small jar like this.
I've also used rocks. You find some nice rocks that will fit, wash them really good. I mean, I've thrown them into the dishwasher where they really get hot and get cleaned off, and use those rocks. I did have one time, I used a used bag, because I do reuse my Ziploc bags, and unfortunately it had developed a hole, so all of my water went into, so be careful of that. Probably use new
bags every time.
New bags.
Yeah, so that's kind of some of the equipment. As far as the process goes for fermenting vegetables, you can ferment just about anything. I mean, if you look in any fermenting book, it'll just give you tons of ideas. It'll list out all the vegetables that you can think of, and they are all fermentable.
Yes.
There's kind of two basic ways to do it, though. If you're going to ferment something that's kind of in a whole form, so for example, these hot red chilies, Maureen down there has garlic, and she's going to go through that next. If you have something you're not going to shred and not going to pound and not going to like push down and squeeze out all the juices because you want it to remain whole, then you have to create the brine to pour over the veggies. So that's what was done here. That's what was done with the garlic. So I didn't want to pound the heck out of these peppers. I wanted them to stay looking like this. So I created probably about a 3% brine. I think you see in recipes anywhere from 1.5 to 3%. So a brine that's the percent of salt to water ratio. That's the ratio that you're looking for. So if you do have a scale at home, sometimes that's useful. If you don't have the first idea how to create a 3% brine solution, just look it up on the internet. There's lots of calculators out there too. If you know that you only need like a couple cups of brine liquid and you're seeing a lot of recipes that want you to make a whole gallon of brine, then just Google it. You'll find calculators that tell you you need 3 teaspoons of salt per 2 cups of water. It'll calculate it for you. So you create the brine, you get the veggies prepped, you put everything in a clean jar, you cover it, you leave it out on your counter. When it starts to kind of look cloudy like this, you know that it's getting close and it's doing really good. You can just kind of pick an amount of time that you want to ferment it and give it a taste. If it tastes too salty for you, you maybe want it to ferment a little longer. Because what's happening during that process is the salt is being kind of, it kind of goes away, right? It doesn't go away entirely.
No.
But the salt flavor and the saltiness will kind of get less over time as you're doing the ferment. But yeah, you just leave it out on your counter, check it in like a couple weeks. If it's winter time, it's going to take longer than it takes during summertime. Fermenting happens faster when it's warmer in your kitchen or in your basement, wherever you're doing this. Am I forgetting anything about that?
What you haven't mentioned, I'll mention as I'm talking about mine.
Okay, perfect. So that's one way to do it, is getting the veggies prepped but not mashing the heck out of them, pouring a brine solution over the top of them, covering it, letting it ferment and sit for at least 2 weeks, maybe more, just out on your counter. You don't have to worry about it spoiling. It's not going to spoil, I promise. The other way to ferment veggies is if you are going to kind of grate them or smash them, or you want them to be more of a paste rather than being a whole vegetable, then you can add salt to the veggies after you've gotten them into sort of the mixture that, the size of mixture that you want. So for this one, this is carrots mixed with ginger, mixed with garlic, mixed with, I think, some thyme that was almost about to spoil in my fridge, so I put it in there. I wanted the texture to be kind of like a carrot kraut, so kind of like a slaw. So I chose to grate the carrots. I grated the garlic, and then I just sort of chopped the ginger because I think that's kind of hard to grate. And then I put salt in that mixture. So again, how much salt? You don't need a lot. You can experiment with how much, but don't like pour a cup of salt in there. Maybe a teaspoon or two for this amount. That maybe even be too much. You can look at different recipes for what they suggest for how much salt to put in there. But you would put the salt in the bowl with the veggie mixture, and then you would let the salt penetrate the veggies. Sometimes you have to wait a little while for the salt to work its magic, but sometimes it happens almost right away. In this one, in the carrot kraut, as soon as I put the salt on and started massaging the mixture and started squeezing the carrots, the liquid just poured out of the veggies. It was amazing. So you do massage them until you feel like you have a pretty good brine going, and then you start packing them into your jar and using whatever pounder you're going to use to push them as far down the jar as you can get, and you keep doing that until you have some brine that is going to eventually be over the top of the veggies. If you can't create enough natural brine that way, by salting, massaging, pounding, you can add brine that you've made to over the top of the veggies. I didn't have to do that for these, but I have had to do it when I'm making kraut.
Yeah.
So I think that's about the process. And then again, you need to weigh it down. If you're not going to use a weight that fits inside the jar where you can put a lid on, you need to weigh it down, and then you could just leave it out on your counter like this, because you're sort of creating a little bit of a water seal with this particular method. So you do not also have to cover it. You could if you wanted, if you're really worried about it. You could just kind of loosely cover it and put a rubber band over the top maybe. questions?
Okay.
Want to talk about garlic?
Yeah, we'll talk about garlic. She talked about using other kinds of jars. This actually is peach halves. That's the jar it is. And you notice it's not a canning jar. It is a pickle jar. It's a fruit jar. Whew, that smells so good. But it can be used also. So what this is just cloves of garlic. And you can buy bags of cloves of garlic and then ferment them. Or you can buy whole bulbs of garlic and peel them. And if you look on the internet, there's all kinds of easy ways to peel garlic. It can be fussy, but it doesn't have to be. And this just has a brine. Now, she talks about 3%, and that is, and there are lots of calculators out there. I usually, most of these are like, for bigger jars like this, 2 tablespoons of salt per about quart of water is about, but each one's going to be a little different.
This is a quart of liquid for reference.
Yeah. So, just another couple of things that I want to say is you're welcome to come up and look at any of these afterwards. They're books of various kinds for fermenting. This is my own personal collection, so you can't check them out. But many of these you'll find out here on the shelves. And if we don't own them, they're owned by another library that we can probably get them from. So do your research. Don't just look on the internet, find the first recipe and say, I'm going to ferment garlic. Do your research. It takes a little time, but you'll get better results and you'll enjoy it better. I've had flubs. I was trying to ferment I have some fermented lemons here, whole lemons. I was trying to ferment some limes. They went bad. I'm not sure what I did. I don't know what. It could have been the limes themselves. Have no clue. They ended up going in the trash. What a sad thing. But it does happen. Not very often, but it does happen. So wash your hands. Make sure you start with really clean vessels. All of that kind of stuff, and you'll do fine. Also, I want to say that afterwards, I'm not sure about hers, but any of this stuff that I'll show you on this end, I brought cups and other things, and you can have samples if you're interested. If you would like to try it, you're welcome to do that. So a jar like this isn't going to take a regular canning band, and so the little, I think they call those pickle poppers or something. I forget now what they call them, but it doesn't work quite as well. So I use tons of
Cheesecloth?
cheesecloth. Thank you. Tons of cheesecloth. And I always have some. I buy it in a whole box, and it's quite expensive to do that. You can buy small amounts. You don't have to spend. But I use so much of it that it'll all be gone in a year or two. And so then I cut it in about the sizes I want. I will wash it and reuse it. It has to be washed by hand. But you could take this and fold it over a few times, put it over the top, put a rubber band around it, and now it's going to do the same thing that does. So I do use the cheesecloth quite a bit. So, I mean, really, cheesecloth is not terribly expensive unless you buy it in this huge, big bulk thing. So that's the one nice thing. Fermenting doesn't have to cost lots of money. You can use veggies and fruits and other things that you probably have around the house anyway. You can use jars that you already have. Now, it is not suggested that you use metal. Even stainless steel, I would not do that. because most fermented foods are very high acid. Okay? You also don't want to use plastic. Now, I do have something that I'll pass around for you to look at, and I put it in a Tupperware. But I would not store it in something like this just as a regular deal. So, okay, so fermented, and the reason I do this, the other thing, she's talking about if you have extra stuff. Well, you know what happens to me in garlic is I get a bulb of garlic, I use half of it, and by the time I get to the other half, it's all dried out and icky. And so now I've wasted half of that bulb. This will last months or probably more than a year. And I just store it in the refrigerator, and I pull it out and I take as much garlic out of it as I want. And then when it's just about empty, I start another one. Another thing that you can do, especially with veggies, is if you look carefully after a day or two, if it's warm enough, you'll start seeing bubbles coming up.
I think this one's got bubbles.
Yeah. So you'll want to come up and take a look at, oh, okay, she's going to bring it
pass it.
around. And bubbles will start coming up. And that's how you'll know. When you see bubbles, you know it is fermenting. And then this is a little different than what most people think about. This is also garlic, but it's fermented in honey, just honey. And you put the garlic in the honey. Now you can use the garlic, and you can see the honey is quite liquid. When it's fermented, when it's finally fermented, it will become very liquid. It's really very tasty. It's very spicy. The honey, and this is where we're not doctors, but I must tell you that if you are starting to get that little tickly throat when you think, oh, I think I've got something coming on, this garlic will knock it out of the park, okay? Or if you've got a little cough and a tickle in your throat, that honey, take care of it right away. I'll tell you what. You can use the garlic in cooking. You can use the honey. It makes a great salad dressing. All sweet and garlicky. I'm not sure you can go wrong with that. And then the last thing, which is not a vegetable, but a fruit. And I will be more than glad to pull one of these out, slice it so you can try it. These are whole lemons. You can see it's cloudy. That's how you know that it's fermented. And like this, you open it up and you smell garlic. With this one, you smell lemons. And you can, again, the reason I did that is because every time I want a lemon, I never have it at home. And when I buy an extra lemon for a recipe and thinking, oh, I'll use it for something else, then it goes bad before I actually use it. So if you have it fermented, now there it is. I've got lemons for the next little while. You can use them in adult beverages if you do that. You can use them in cooking. Of course, any kind of Greek cooking, they use lots of lemons and others. But you can use the zest. So, I mean, everything is there. It's just a whole lemon. And you wash it off a little bit, but you don't have to scrub because much of what is going to cause that fermentation is right on the fruits or vegetables themselves.
Mm-hmm. On the skins.
On the skins. And so you want to wash off any dirt or things like that. And of course, I do try to be careful about where I buy the stuff. Oftentimes I try to get organic to make sure that it's as clean as possible, so to speak. Let's see, was there anything else? I can't think of anything. That takes care of the veggies.
I'll jump on your cheesecloth bandwagon. I have some down here too, but I sometimes buy frozen tamales, and they come in these bags from Woodman's, and I love these.
Oh.
And I will sometimes just cut them up into squares and use them because they're pretty thin. So these
Cool.
make great covers as well. If you're not wanting to use sort of the lid method or this pickle burping thing.
Well, see, that's the thing. You can buy expensive equipment. There's another thing besides the glass weights that I saw, and it's actually springs with a special lid that holds it all down. It's a big, heavy-duty spring, and it looks really fun and interesting, and probably works great. But you don't have to have it.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend a lot of money to do this.
Yes, agreed. Thank you for the skins reminder, because I didn't say that. Yeah, for this one, for the carrot kraut, I didn't take the skins off the carrots or the ginger. I did peel the garlic that I put in.
Yeah.
But I left the skins on even in the ginger. I mean, I peeled off some of those rough parts, those really dry parts of a ginger, but I kept the rest of the skin on.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So then we're going to talk about the milk ferments. Okay. Now, to start with, let's talk about what you need to do this. First of all, you need milk. You need good milk. I would not go to Quick Trip and though I've done it, and it did fine, but anymore I don't do it. Because if I'm going to go to all this work to do this, I want it to be as best a product as it can. So, think about buying good milk, okay? Now, none of this, I will tell you, none of this is raw milk. But I use raw milk at home for my own things. This is not because I was going to share it, so I don't want any of you to have to worry about that. But the first thing we have here is kefir. And this is the first time we're going to kind of talk about a SCOBY. She's going to talk about SCOBY, but it's going to be a little different kind of SCOBY. What we have here is milk kefir. Kefir comes in two kinds, milk and water. And I will pass this around, and you're welcome to touch it. I will throw this away when I get done today. So you're welcome to touch it just to see what it is. But what you do is you take that and you add it to your milk right in the jar. And the one nice thing about kefir, and I know that I'm probably pronouncing it the American way. I think it's supposed to be kefar or something like that, but we Americans, we kind of do our own thing with the language. So you take the milk, and you can take it right out of the refrigerator. Thank you. You can take it right out of the refrigerator, and you put the grains into it. That's what they're called. They're called the kefir grains, but it's a type of SCOBY. Oh, SCOBY. SCOBY stands for a symbiotic
Culture.
culture of bacteria and yeast. Mm-hmm. So that's what SCOBY stands for. And then you set this on your kitchen counter. Yeah, it's milk, but it's okay. It's really okay. Take my word for it. And you don't have to heat it up first. That's really nice. Depending on how long you let it culture, depends on how sour it is. You might not like it very sour, so maybe you'd only leave it in for a few hours. You could leave it in for 8 hours and get a little tang. You could leave it in for 24 or 48 hours. And if it separates into whey, okay, the liquidy kind of looking stuff, and with the more solids here, now you know that that is really strong. Now you can make kefir cheese, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. Or maybe you like really, really sour stuff. There you go. So I use kefir a lot in smoothies. You know, now you're getting good fruit and whatever you put in your smoothies. I put raw eggs, and I know you're not supposed to eat raw eggs, but I'm very careful where I don't buy them at the store. And fruit, all kinds of things in there with the kefir and the yogurt, and it makes a great smoothie, and it's a wonderful thing for first thing in the morning to wake you up. So, and we have here milk kefir and water kefir grains that we'll have a drawing for, so you might be able to take one of those home. These are not grains that they come right from the kefir factory. I'll say that from the same person that wrote the handout, not the book one, but the other one. So you can try it on your own. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to make water kefir, so it would be like drinking a soda pop. You can put fresh fruits in it, or you can just use it the way it is, and it would be water and sugar, or water and honey. I've used water and molasses or sorghum, and it's very tasty, just like that. And it has all those good probiotics. It's so, I mean, think about it. It's water and a little sugar and the SCOBY. And now you've got a really good probiotic for
Pennies.
pennies. And it's better for you than any soda you can imagine. So then we have yogurt. And one of the things I wanted to show you when she was talking about equipment, this is something that I bought. We have a very cold house. I'm cheap and refuse to turn up my heat very much. So, and we turn it off at night, always have. We just turn off the heat at night. So the house is very cold. So take my word for it, none of this stuff works very well that way when it's that cold. When your house is 65 degrees or less, and then at night maybe it's going to be 55, 58, you're not going to get any of this stuff to work well, especially during the winter time. During the summer, it's going to be warm enough. It's a little different. But if you keep your air conditioning up, you're still going to have some problems. So this is a heater. It goes from 70 degrees to, I think, about 125. And I made the yogurt in this. I did the beets for the beet kvass that we'll be talking about later. And apparently you can dehydrate in it. I have never done that, but you can. We've also made, what's the name of that stuff that you put on crumpets?
A chutney?
Curd.
Not curd.
Oh,
Huh?
a chutney?
No.
No.
It's made out of cream.
Oh. Creme fraiche?
Yeah, it's like creme fraiche, but that's not it either.
Okay.
Anyway, it'll come to me. And this does that too. And it's basically cream that you, Clotted cream, that's it. Thank you. Clotted cream, and it is like butter without it being turned into butter. I mean, it's that thick, and it's so rich, and it's so good on scones. That's what I meant to say, scones. Scones and, yeah. So I've done that in here too. Lots of different ferments, any of that. And this is a lifesaver since I don't mind heating this little thing, but I hate to heat up my whole house. So there's lots of different things. I also sometimes use a cooler and with the heating pad in it, and that works really well also. Okay, so yogurt. So I did make the yogurt in here. Unfortunately, I did a little heated too far, unfortunately. And so it has separated just a little bit. So it made the yogurt cheese really nicely. But it's still going to taste okay. It's just, it was a little warmer than it should be. Yogurt has to be kept at about 110 degrees. So what you do when you make yogurt is you heat the milk to about 110. Don't boil it. Just heat it slowly. If you get it above, 110, 120, 130, let it cool back down. And then you get some yogurt. So you could either use yogurt that you've already made and use a little of that, or you can, and this happens to be a big one, but you can buy sometimes those little ones. You just have to make sure that it is whole milk, okay? I would not waste your time doing skim milk yogurt, really, but, and plain. Look on the ingredients and make sure there's no added sugars or this thing or that thing. This one is, let me find it, certified pasteurized organic whole milk. Now there are some pectins and some vitamin D. The pectins are to make it a little thicker. That's what they use. But it works okay. But don't get any that has fruit or sugar in it, because oftentimes the yogurt itself has is not as good. The other thing I always look for is with the ingredients on really good yogurt, you'll have a list of the actual bacteria that you'll find in the yogurt. And so I always look for that. And if I don't find that, I pass it by and look for one that does. And there's several. This one I believe you can buy at most of the grocery stores around, this brand. And it's a pretty good brand. And I think they also make it that's not organic, but Basics, of course, has several different varieties that are really good. But you can buy just a little one. You don't need this great big thing, okay? Because after you've heated it, when you have it at the 110 temperature, okay, you want to put a couple of tablespoons, good heaping tablespoons of your yogurt into this. Stir it up really good. Put it in your jars, and then put into whatever it is that you're going to keep it warm. And you want to keep it at about 110. This seems to be a little hotter, and I always forget about that. I did turn it down, but I hadn't turned it down quite, so it got a little warmer. So then, we want to take some of the yogurt, or maybe you have the kefir that you allowed to get, and it's already started to separate, and you're going to make cheese. So first of all, you need a colander with some sort of base. So if you're doing a small amount, this works really well. I have a bigger one that I use quite often. And you take your cheesecloth, and I usually just put it, and I use 2 or 3, okay, depending on how big your colander is, to go across here. And then you take your yogurt and you just pour it in. You push this over, all of these over. I usually use a small plate with a bowl on top of that with a jar of water. And that is quite heavy enough. You put that all there, and you put it, I always just put it back in the refrigerator at this point, because that's what you want. And you want it cold. And then, once it has completely drained out, this is what you end up with. Whoops. It's still a little, and then here is the cheesecloth. And what it's like is like cream cheese, just a little tangier. And it's great in dips. You can make anything that you would use sour cream / cream cheese, you can use on this. And you just, usually it will, you can see it'll just fall right off of the cheesecloth. And there you go. And I'll tell you a little secret. If you're one of the people who loves Greek yogurt, okay? I've had people say, I won't have anything else but Greek yogurt. It's the best. Well, guess what they've done? They've drained the whey off of it. Not all of it, but it becomes creamier, right? So then you end up with the whey. This is what's left over after you've drained it off of here. So why did I keep that? Well, to show you guys, but I always try to keep some in my refrigerator. You can, first of all, you can make ricotta cheese from this. Believe it or not, there is still enough milk solids that you can make ricotta cheese. And I have several books over here that talk about how to do that. You can use it in soups. Anytime you're going to use the whey, I would put this in very last and just barely rewarm it, okay, if you need to. You don't have to boil it, because if you boil it, everything in there is dead. So just put it in, and then you'll have, you can feed it to the animals, the birds. Our cat loves yogurt and kefir, loves it. He's 21 years old, so he has done very well at this. So let's see, is there anything else? Any questions? No? All right.
This is from a long time ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
SCOBY stands for Symbiotic Culture of
Bacteria and yeast.
Okay.
Yep. So there we go.
Nice.
Kombucha.
Kombucha. All right. I'm going to attempt to demo this. All right. Kombucha is a somewhat carbonated, fermented tea. So you see it in the grocery stores a lot now. It's really trendy. I have a few samples up here of bottles you can purchase at a grocery store. I picked 3 random bottles last weekend. I have about 42 ounces worth here. It cost me $8.58. So about 20.4 cents per ounce is what I paid. Then I calculated how much it cost me to make kombucha at home, less than a penny per ounce, which really is kind of no surprise because the only ingredients you need are tea bags or loose tea and a little bit of sugar and a SCOBY, which hopefully you've gotten for free or you've started to grow your own SCOBY from a little bit of store-bought kombucha, not a flavored kind, but a plain kind. So it's definitely cost effective if you're someone who really, really enjoys kombucha. It is cost effective to learn how to make it yourself because it is very, very efficient and very easy. So I'm going to try to move some things around so you can see what I'm about to do. This is the type of vessel I tend to use for my kombucha making. This fits 15 cups of liquid. just to give you an idea of how much liquid that is. You can use loose leaf tea or you can use tea bags. It is advised that you use black tea or green tea. You should not be using a really strongly flavored tea like Earl Grey, which I think is considered a black tea or maybe a white tea, I can't remember. But that flavor is too strong. It has too much of an essential oil in it or something. And then herbal teas are not recommended. You should be using that something that is from the tea plant family, the tea genus and species. If you think of something like chamomile, that's actually a different species from tea, and that's, even though it's called an herbal tea, it's a completely different plant, and that is not advised to be used for kombucha making. So I just buy Lipton black tea. Earlier today, I brewed, this is the first step, I brewed a pretty concentrated amount of tea. I have 4 cups of liquid in here. I used 8 black tea bags. I almost boiled the water. I stopped it right before it hit boiling point. I brewed the tea. I squeezed out the bags so that more of the concentrate ended up in the liquid, and I let it sit for about 10 minutes after that. And then I threw out the tea bags, or you can compost them. And then I added a cup of sugar. I added the cup of sugar while the tea was still hot, sitting in the pan on the stove. And then I just let it sit on the stove as it cooled down. You want to add the sugar. You don't have to add the sugar while the tea is hot, but it makes the most sense because it's going to dissolve very quickly and very thoroughly. So then I let it cool down to room temperature and put it in this pitcher just so it's a little easier for me to pour. Now in this vessel, which is my fermenting vessel, I have another 10 cups of filtered water in here. So I have a filter in my fridge. That's the water I'm using. You can use tap water. If you use tap water, from what I've read, it's advised that you let it sit out for a while, so some of the chemicals and the chlorine in particular that is in city water to keep it sanitary.
It takes about 24 hours to allow the chlorine to dissipate from city water. And you just put it in something and leave it open.
Yeah, just like this.
And it'll evaporate out.
And then it's safe to use. I suppose you could boil your water if you wanted to, but then you're dealing with more hot liquid, and there might just be more of a waiting time because you don't want to put your SCOBY into hot liquid. That probably will kill it.
Yes.
You want to be working at room temperature by the time you're ready to add your SCOBY. So I have 10 cups of liquid in there. I am going to pour in my tea. I might overflow a little bit.
Oh, we got lots of towels, no problem.
I'm going to stop right about there. That should be enough tea. You could stir it, I guess. I often don't stir it. At this point, so we've got the sugar in there, the tea in there. I'm ready to add the SCOBY. Let me walk this around. I have some SCOBYs in here. As you ferment, you start to create SCOBYs every time you make a batch of kombucha. So I have like kind of 2 masses in here, but really I could divide these up and I probably have more like 3 or 4, maybe 5 SCOBYs in here. They're pretty gross looking. I mean, they look like you're a mad scientist in your own kitchen. They smell pretty bad.
That's part of the fun.
Want to smell? They smell pretty gross, don't they? They smell good to me because I like kombucha.
It smells like the kombucha.
Yeah, it smells like the kombucha, exactly.
You know, some of this stuff does take a little time. If you've not eaten or drank much of it, it takes a little time to get used to it. But honest, you can change your palate. You can change your taste buds. And by just forcing yourself to eat or drink what you know is really good for you. And sometimes that's what it takes.
The next thing I'm going to add, so just like with the yogurt, when Maureen added a little bit from that large container, she added a couple tablespoons of store-bought yogurt. At this point, you do need to add a little bit of kombucha, either left from your last batch, or you could put in a little bit of store-bought as long as it's unflavored. So just check the label. You don't want to add a flavor. I call it starter tea, and I just keep it in my fridge, and I keep it nicely labeled so I know that I can use it as my starter tea. So I'm just going to add, I don't know, a half a cup to a cup. I'm not even going to measure. This is why I love fermenting. Not even going to measure. I'm a very particular person. I'm a reference librarian, and I think I like this because I don't have to measure. Yeah. And I am going to wash my hands quick because I am going to touch my SCOBY. So
That would be, they make a sauerkraut type stuff with kimchi.
kimchi.
And so many people say it stinks, but it's just fermented. And it's interesting when she mentions that almost every old culture had its favorite ferments. That's how they preserved food. Because you can't, plain milk will last one day without refrigeration, and then it starts to ferment. And so, but if it's fermented, even on a shelf, it will last for way longer than what you'd think, probably maybe a couple of weeks. It's going to get stronger in flavor, but...
Yes, exactly. Okay, are we ready? See if I can grab it easily without too much trouble.
The first time I made it,
I can't.
really, the SCOBYs are kind of, well...
They are slimy.
Yeah, they are kind of slimy. They're weird feeling.
Just plop it in. Sometimes it sinks right away. Sometimes it floats. It's okay if it sinks, but by the time you think your ferment is done, if it is still at the bottom, you need to toss the batch. It should float its way up over the course of the ferment. Also, it will, so this is kind of considered the mother SCOBY. You probably noticed it was maybe only about this round. As this ferments, the SCOBY is probably going to form a layer on top, which is like a daughter. It's going to form another layer of SCOBY, and it will probably be bigger and be almost the circumference of the liquid that's in here. At this point, you use whatever towel covering you want to use. This is just a little tea towel. These are, when you buy Smart Wool socks, they come with these things with the socks instead of the little plastic that they used to add the price tag to and stuff.
Okay.
These are wonderful. I love these. They work perfectly for this. All right, you're done. This sits on your counter for probably at least a couple weeks again. The way that you know it's done is you taste it. You taste it to your liking. The way that you do that, and it's going to taste super sweet since this hasn't been sitting out. You just take a straw and you will stick it into the liquid underneath the SCOBY. Take a sip. If it's sour and tangy to your liking, it's done. You can stop there. You can bottle it. You can bottle it in bottles like these. You can bottle it in just mason jars or jars that you have laying around. Put them in your fridge, and you just drink it like you have just bought one at the store. You also have the option, though, of doing a second ferment. So what's happening in here, in this vessel, over the course of the ferment, is that the SCOBY is eating the sugar, and turning that into lactic acid. So it's becoming very acidic, and that's what makes it taste sour. And that's also why it doesn't taste very sugary when it's done, because all the sugar, the bulk of the sugar has been consumed by the SCOBY. And you just have a really tangy, sour tasting beverage left behind. But it's not necessarily super fizzy because you've left it open and oxygenated the whole time. So the purpose of the second ferment is to make it more carbonated. And also, at that point, you have the option of flavoring it. So what I did with this batch of 3 is I bottled my kombucha when it was done. I poured a little bit of antioxidant 100% juice that I bought at the store. I only put in a couple ounces, and I think actually that could have been maybe a little bit too much. Then I left these out on the counter completely sealed like this for another 2 days. I think they've been on the counter for 2 days. I did check them every day because depending on how active the contents of your bottle are, these do have the potential to explode. They may build up so much CO2 in here, so much carbonation that they can explode and they can shatter and cause a huge problem in your kitchen. So you also want to burp these. You'll be able to hear if there's too much carbonation. You may see it fizz and go over the top of the bottle. If you get to that point, you need to take them off your counter and please put them in your fridge. Because if you let them sit any longer, they have the potential of shattering. You don't have to flavor. You don't have to do a second ferment. A lot of people do because they particularly enjoy the fizziness, because then it tastes a lot like a soda would. You may notice they start to grow their own scobies. I pass this around. There's an orange blob growing in there. That's a new little SCOBY forming. You can strain that out when you're ready to drink it if you don't want to swallow it, but if you accidentally swallow the little SCOBY, it won't kill you, I promise. It just may feel a little weird on the way down.
Yeah.
I'm witness to that. Yeah, I know.
Oh, okay.
I've actually done that before.
Yeah.
But we, also the scobies, whether it be extra kefir grains, because they will grow, just like the SCOBY for kombucha, kefir will grow. And so you'll start out with this many grains, and before you know it, you've got lots more. You can feed them to the birds and the wildlife outside, the squirrels. You can feed them to your animals. You can, I've heard of planting them in your garden, which will add nutrients to the dirt. She said that she's heard of drying the kombucha, SCOBY.
Drying the
And it
SCOBY.
becomes almost like leather, and then using it for sewing
Yeah.
and crafts. So there we go.
Lots of crazy ideas, a lot of the crazy ideas are in this book. This is considered, from places I've researched, this is sort of a kind of like a Bible of fermentation.
I would say there's 2 of them.
2 of them.
That one, and then this would be the other one. So this one is all ferments. This one has other types of good food. So, but it also has tons of fermenting. So, yeah.
And that's mostly recipes.
Yes.
And this is mostly text.
Yeah,
This
this-
is mostly information.
Yes. Lots of good information. So, again, I want to reiterate, please do your research. It does take a little extra time, but even that can be really rewarding when you look through and realize that there are a few different ways of doing it. And some of what happens in your kitchen will depend on what's in the air.
Exactly.
So, because what's in her kitchen and what's in mine are going to be 2 different things, believe it or not.
All right, kvass.
Kvass.
Go for it.
This in here is beet kvass. So it's made out of beets. And I'm going to say that this is probably, beets are probably the only vegetable you don't want to grate. Because if you grate them, it will probably ferment, and then you will, but not in the way that we're talking. It'll ferment and you'll have beet wine. So you don't want wine, you just want beet kvass. Beet kvass is like yogurt and kefir. It probably comes from Eastern Europe, the Middle East. All of those cultures have a tradition of these kinds of ferments. So how this is made, and like I said, I brought plenty. You're welcome to give it a try. You want to cut up the beets like you would potatoes or something to boil, but you don't need. You want to peel them and then cube them, and again, this is just a brine, so it's water and salt. Now this I did use an inoculant. And what I did is I took some of the brine out of here and I put it into the beets and water and salt so it would go faster. And so if you start with an inoculant, plus I thought this yummy garlic would probably add a little yummy to the flavor of the kvass. I also sometimes add ginger and whole garlic and turmeric sometimes into it, and it adds a whole different flavor, especially if you're not a huge fan of beets. Some people love them, some people don't. So, and you do the same thing. You cover it in whatever way works best. And I just used canning jars like this. And you don't want to put this kind of lid on it yet. You want it, the air will give you, you've inoculated it maybe, but if you haven't inoculated, now the air will inoculate it. So, and again, you just watch for those little bubbles, and I never saw the bubbles coming up. What I saw was this ring of frothy bubbles across the top. And it's working. It's fermenting. And so then after a few days, you strain off the beets. Now those beets are good for 2 times. The second one won't be as strong, so it won't be as strong of a beet flavor, but you can add another brine to it and use those same beets one more time. And then I just put them in a bottle and put them in the refrigerator, and you can drink it. And really, they're finding that beets are really, really good for you. I forget what the, I forget what the particular thing that's in beets that so many of us are doing without. This is a really nice way to do it. So get your beets. Get your beets as well as a nice little, and really some mornings I just do a little, almost like a little shot glass. So any questions? Anything we've forgotten? Any thoughts?
I did think of something I didn't mention especially for the veggie ferments. Sometimes I get asked, what kind of salt do you use? Oh. Just table salt. You don't have to go out and buy. Sometimes you'll see special bags labeled canning and pickling salt. Yeah, you don't need that. In fact, sometimes they add preservatives to that. Right. So just use regular old table salt.
Right. Except you don't want to use anything that has iodine added. I use just a regular salt that has a color to it. I don't think it's good to eat white salt. So there's all kinds of colors of salt. I use the Redmond salt, which I believe comes from the Great Salt Lake area. My husband, he likes Himalayan pink salt. There's also some yummy salt that comes from Australia. If you really like trying new salts, I would not use this for ferments. There's a black salt that comes from Hawaii, very sulfury, but it can really do wonderful things for your cooking. I would think any of those salts will work. You might want, I would think you, especially some of these other salts that have so much more, because those colors in them are the extra minerals. And that's what makes those salts so good. They haven't stripped out all of those minerals. And a lot of those are electrolytes that we don't get a lot of and we need. You need that teeny little bit of whatever that electrolyte is. And so those salts can help your diet without adding too much sodium. Like the black salt in particular, it's high in sulfur. That's why it's black. And so I don't know how that would react with that. I'm not sure.
Check the reference book.
Yes. There you go.
Let me just see if it says anything about. There are a lot of pages about salt, so I would say do your research.
Do your research. Do your research. So,
Thank you guys so much.
oh, thank you. Thank you.